This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern.
And I'm your co-hostess, Dahlia Shenlin, speaking to you from New York today.
Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us because we're counting on you. This episode is part of a series in partnership with the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, focused on democracy, populism, authoritarianism, and all of its causes, symptoms, and manifestations.
And we will be discussing a cause, symptom, and manifestation, the one that everyone loves to hate, social media. Our guide today is Siva Vaidyanathan. He is the Robertson Professor of Media Studies and the Director for the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. He used to be a journalist before moving into academia. He's taught at numerous universities. Siva is the author of 5 books and the co-editor of a 6th, and we'll be discussing Anti-Social Media, How Facebook Disconnects Us and Undermines Democracy, published by Oxford University Press in 2018. Siva, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Your book is, the title is sort of self-explanatory, Facebook Disconnects Us, Undermines Democracy. And I want to ask you, do you view Facebook as the main threat to democracy today, at least in the countries that you focus on? Or if you have to rank, let's say, the top 5 threats, where would Facebook be on that list?
Well, look, the main threat to democracy worldwide is a loosely co-inspired, if not coordinated, authoritarian mood. And we find it in full expression in Russia, in China, in India, in the Philippines, in Brazil, in Hungary, in Poland, in some of the parties in Italy, and some of the parties in France, most alarmingly in Germany, and certainly in the United States, where it's bubbling up through extreme right parties. The role that Facebook plays in this, though, is both inadvertent and important. Facebook was not designed to either destroy democracy or protect democracy, even though there have been moments when Mark Zuckerberg and enthusiasts about Facebook have proclaimed that Facebook is a route to democracy. You might remember 2011 when dictators fell in Tunisia and Egypt. There was all this high-minded blather about how social media was an instrument for democratization. Of course, nobody was looking at Syria and and Bahrain at the time. But nonetheless, what's happened is that those extremist movements have hijacked Facebook, have learned how to play Facebook, have learned that the things that are designed to help us find like-minded people, if our interests are hobbies or music or pets, are the same dynamics and design dynamics that can find like-minded people when it comes to racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, and various efforts to undermine democracy. And so when you have a candidate like Narendra Modi in India, or a candidate like Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines, or a candidate like Donald Trump in the United States, who none of them have any interest in the cultural trappings of democracy, in the openness of democracy, in giving recognition to political opponents and dignity to political opponents, Facebook is a perfect vehicle for them. They can find like-minded people. They can organize them rather quickly. They can make sure that indignation runs at the highest possible level because Facebook is designed to amplify strong emotions. And that means Facebook is beautiful for baby pictures and for puppy pictures, but also for misogyny, anti-Semitism, racism, and efforts to undermine democracy.
So just to paraphrase Dahlia's previous question, so do you attribute their success, the success of these authoritarian leaders, primarily to Facebook, meaning that they wouldn't have been as successful as they are in the 21st century if they hadn't been for Facebook?
So I would not say primarily. I would say partially, but significantly. Look, any movement, any group, whether it's pro-democracy or anti-democracy, pro-human rights or anti-human rights, will use the communication platforms available to them at the moment. 1989, the people rising up against the tyranny of communism in the Eastern Bloc of Europe used fax machines and landline telephones and Voice of America and whatever else they could find to distribute information, to find people, to organize people, ultimately to overthrow these dictatorships. And that's just a fact of life. So in 2011, people used what was available to them. Turned out they didn't use Facebook and Twitter as much as we pretended. Nonetheless, some did. And even today, it continues. So I wouldn't say that these movements would not succeed without Facebook, but Facebook has made it easy. Donald Trump's campaign manager, his digital campaign manager from 2012, has been very blunt that Donald Trump would never have been president without Facebook. He ran his entire campaign on Facebook for the most part. The advertising structure was all determined by Facebook. Playing Facebook ads was the only thing the Trump campaign understood. It had nobody on staff who had worked on a major national campaign before. They weren't well versed in the regular methods of American politics. And so they did what they knew, which was to buy Facebook ads and use Facebook groups and organize people through Facebook and use Facebook to raise money. And it worked brilliantly. It worked in a way that ran below the radar of most people who were following American politics at the moment. I would go so far as to say that there's a very good chance Donald Trump would not be president if Facebook had never existed. But I wouldn't say that the overall global anti-democratic movements need Facebook to succeed, but Facebook has helped.
Okay, I want to try to understand how this actually works. In the 3 years since your book has come out, and let's say you were writing it, I suppose, in the year or two before that, there have been many types of criticism of Facebook and people identifying overlapping problems. Can you identify a few themes that you think are responsible for Facebook's damaging impact on society, categories of criticism? Where does your book or the various sections of your book fit into those?
So let's go through three of them. One is the process of constant surveillance, right? Facebook watches everything we do, and Facebook watches everything we do even when we are not engaging with Facebook. Facebook watches everything we do very often, even if we are not members of Facebook. And they do that through other applications on our phones, which Facebook has often granted permission to watch. Facebook has ways of embedding itself in web browsers if you're using a computer and tracking people across different activities and keeping essentially a dossier on each of us. And the importance of the dossier only comes into view when aligned with other dossiers. So Facebook is constantly tracking our inclinations, our opinions, our desires, and trying to predict what our next interests are, which people we will most be interested in interacting with, which issues, which sources of material we're most interested in interacting with, because Facebook's imperative is to keep us engaged with Facebook as much as possible. It's as simple as that. But to do that, Facebook must hook us. It must give us that feeling that we're missing out on something if we're not engaged with Facebook. So that's how it's designed. And that involves a tremendous amount of surveillance. That surveillance and its ability to predict our desires helps it target advertisement. Advertisement is how Facebook makes many billions of dollars, is one of the 5 richest companies in the history of the world in almost no time. But that targeting of advertising is the same dynamic that helps target all sorts of other content. And if you are trying to figure out how to make your material, make your propaganda fly on Facebook, you understand pretty quickly that tailoring things to trigger strong emotions will work better than sober deliberation or discourse on Facebook. So let me give you an example. Let's say that there is a very well thought out, deeply researched analysis of European monetary policy, and it runs in The Economist. And this is a very important article that has tremendous implications, and I post it on my Facebook page. Almost nobody will see it. Almost nobody will see it because there's nothing about the article that indicates to Facebook's algorithms that this is going to trigger strong emotions. Without strong emotions, right? If it only triggers thought, deep deliberation, maybe mindful debate, that doesn't interest Facebook. That means that article, no matter what its ultimate conclusion is, will sink like a stone on Facebook. It won't anger anybody. It won't create pleasure. It won't make anyone laugh. The Economist never makes anyone laugh. And it only rarely makes people angry.
It actually makes me laugh, I have to say, because the subtitles, the headlines and the subheadings are very funny.
Well, that is
true.
For
any Economist editors out there listening.
It is witty. I would say that. Yes. But then if I were to instead post a picture of my golden retriever, actually I have 2 golden retrievers, I immediately get hundreds of responses because Facebook knows pictures of golden retrievers do spark strong emotions. And if I were to put up an anti-Semitic rant, that would immediately end up on every one of my friends' Facebook pages because it would immediately generate tremendous response. Almost all negative, fortunately. Some of it might be positive. The same goes for conspiracy theories. If I were to put up a rant against vaccines or a rant against climate science, again, most of my friends would react to it as if I don't know what I'm talking about, and I wouldn't, as if I was doing great damage, and I would be. And that very act of responding, right? What we're taught to do in real life is to respond to nonsense, try to educate, try to convince, maybe try to mock. Every one of those responses is a signal to Facebook that this subject is hot. Let's spread it as far as we can. This is why conspiracy theories like QAnon, this is why extreme right movements work so well on Facebook, because they spark strong emotions, either positive or negative, and it doesn't matter whether they're popular or not. The more indignation they generate, the more popular they will ultimately be, because they will find followers simply by virtue of traveling around. Now, this has 2 implications. One, Facebook is the perfect machine for recruiting people to these movements and creating these worldviews that are dark and dangerous. But it also means that it robs us of the ability to deliberate deeply about important issues. So if I were to post a well thought out, well-researched article about climate science or about vaccines, well, vaccines may be too hot a subject right now, but about climate science, it's not going to generate any sort of thoughtful deliberation about what we might do next, right? It's only going to generate indignation or approbation. And that's just not good. It's not going to help us think through our problems as democratic citizens. So the mega issue, the larger issue, and the reason Facebook ultimately threatens democracy has nothing to do with any particular piece of content that flows on Facebook or whether Donald Trump can express himself on Facebook. What really matters is that Facebook structures our entire media ecosystem to limit deep deliberation, to limit the ability for people to think seriously about serious issues.
So let me ask you this. Why Facebook in particular? I think I understand why among the social media, because it's probably the biggest and most influential. But why not other tech giants such as Google? They too have surveillance of what we know and what we, our search history, for example. And also they control the flow of information of virtually every computer user around the world. Why are they off the hook and Facebook aren't?
So let me put it in numbers. Facebook has, at last count, 2.7 billion users, 700 million more than YouTube has, which is owned by Google. We don't actually know how many people use Google. Google doesn't release that number. There's really no way to tell. We know that most of the world uses Google all the time. I would say that Google and Facebook work in similar ways to undermine democracy, but Facebook in a much more acute way. Google has other effects. YouTube particularly is a dangerous medium. YouTube is responsible for so much of the dangerous propaganda out there. And in many ways, YouTube works like Facebook does. It exploits the surveillance to not only target advertisements, but to send people toward extremist content through algorithmic amplification. So yes, YouTube and Facebook work very similar ways. Now, YouTube is not social in the way that Facebook is. It doesn't connect you to a group of your friends and rely on the trust that you have in certain friends and certain family members and so forth. So there are very important differences as well. But I would say that YouTube is almost as dangerous as Facebook. So 2.7 billion Facebook users around the world. There has never been anything that has touched 2.7 billion people. There's no religion that big. There is no media company that has ever reached 2.7 billion. The BBC has never reached 2.7 billion. CNN has never reached 2.7 billion people. It is a stunning number to think about. There are only 7.4 billion people on Earth, and 2.7 billion of them use Facebook regularly. That number is growing quickly. If you add people who use Instagram and WhatsApp, but not necessarily Facebook, you've hit 3 billion. That's just a stunning number. Nothing in human history has ever reached that kind of number. The only thing close is YouTube at 1.9 or 2 billion users as of last count. The other social media platforms are nowhere near it. Twitter has about 330 million users. Twitter is largely irrelevant around the world when compared to Facebook. Now, 330 million is a big number in most media circles, right? The BBC would love to have 330 million regular watchers, readers, and listeners. Nonetheless, Twitter's influence is nowhere near what Facebook's is. Facebook is much more intimate. It's much more structured. It's much more algorithmically driven. It's much more pervasive, and it's growing and making money, unlike Twitter. So, in that sense, I think Facebook is the dominant media form in the world right now, the most pervasive media form we have ever had in human history, and only Google comes close. I would point out that in 2011, I wrote a book called The Googleization of Everything, because in 2011, I thought Google was the most important, most influential, perhaps most dangerous company in the world in these matters. I still think that oil companies and tobacco companies are pretty bad as well. But nonetheless, I wrote a book about Google to raise awareness of this pervasiveness in 2011. It's simply that Facebook has sort of displaced it to some degree in terms of importance in the ensuing years.
I want to read an excerpt which I think illustrates just how much danger you think Facebook is doing. And you explain that even if Facebook has some good effects, and I'm quoting you now, yet we are collectively worse off because of Facebook. If you wanted to build a machine that would distribute propaganda to millions of people, distract them from important issues, energize hatred and bigotry, erode social trust, undermine journalism, foster doubts about science, and engage in massive surveillance all at once, you would make something a lot like Facebook. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about that excerpt is because I want to ask you if we look at a balance sheet of the negatives and the positives about Facebook, if we aren't downplaying some of the positive sides of Facebook as well. And just to do a little thought exercise to myself, with your permission, I rewrote the passage in a mirror image to say, you might have been the target of negative experiences on Facebook, yet we are collectively better off. Facebook has generated unprecedented levels of connectedness at a time when the Western world is coping with a documented epidemic of loneliness, requiring governments to develop national coping strategies and divert large budgets to confront the problem. Facebook has broken down elite gatekeepers so that regular people have a platform to spread information and real-time observation of events around the world, open windows onto severe social problems and upheavals, even in the world's more repressive communities, and help mobilize civic action for good causes, maybe re-engage in different young people in political life and broadened our global perspective. I want your response. Yes or no? Is that right? Is that wrong?
So it's not completely wrong, but I think that most of the positive effects of Facebook occur at the micro level, at the level of a particular organization or at the level of a particular person. So Facebook has been good to 2.7 billion people individually. Facebook's been very good to me in my personal life. It's kept me in contact with friends from childhood and with long lost relatives. It's connected me with new people. It's connected me with new ideas in some cases, although not with no serious depth. But collectively, it's been a disaster. And this argument is not unlike one we could make about automobiles. My car is wonderful. It does exactly what I want. It fits me well. It serves me well. I love my car. Our cars collectively have been a disaster for the planet, right? So on the good side of the ledger, you have to ask, for whom is it good and under what conditions is it good, right? So there are externalities to everything that is good. It's the term economists use for the effects in the world that aren't counted on the balance sheet. And the negative externalities of Facebook are quite extreme, especially when you look at places that depend on Facebook even more than the US or Israel or Canada or Western Europe. Places like Myanmar, places like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia. These are countries where almost everything flows through Facebook and almost everybody uses Facebook, at least every adult uses Facebook. And these are places where authoritarianism reigns supreme in most cases, even in quasi-democratic spots like Pakistan and the Philippines. Authoritarian leaders use Facebook to crush opposition, to harass opponents, to spread all sorts of nonsense, all sorts of lies, all sorts of dangerous conspiracies to help assert power. So the damage is pretty clear. It's well documented. Meanwhile, my life is great. Your life might be great. 2.7 billion people are not fools. They use Facebook because it's good for them. This sounds paradoxical, but it's not if you understand or you grasp the difference between the micro and the macro.
Your work draws generously on some of the earlier giants of cultural criticism. Some of my own favorites are your mentor, Neil Postman, and you look to him and Susan Sontag to justify the arguments of how technology can be deceptive, erode substantive thinking and notions of truth. Specifically, both of those looked at photography and television. And I wonder if, in a way, this not exactly in some way contradicts your basic thesis that Facebook is introducing something that is uniquely damaging, because what actually comes out of that reading is that both of these thinkers and many others identified, interesting and parallel dilemmas and dangers of previous versions of technology, from the simple photograph through to television.
Yes. I think to be clear, I'm making the case that Facebook is not necessarily introducing unique phenomena, but extreme phenomena, removing friction, amplifying, making easier, making louder, making more powerful. So many of the maladies that Susan Sontag saw in photography, most people didn't see in photography for decades, right? Susan Sontag said photography distills the subject to such a degree that it makes it impossible to tell a story about it, or to derive meaning from it, or to embed it in an argument or a deep account. That photography removes so much thought from a moment that it might actually undermine what we often think of as the documentary or journalistic value of a photograph. Its punch is purely emotional. And this is not just, so when Sontag wrote that about photography, this was a controversial position. I have to say it's still not universally accepted among scholars of photography. Nonetheless, it's a really powerful point. It's one I happen to think has great validity. Neil Postman, in many ways, built his entire argument about television on much of what Susan Sontag was saying about photography. And he made the point that television also robs us of our ability to think clearly and distills everything as entertainment. So it doesn't matter if there are, in 1973 and 74, there were week-long hearings about the Watergate scandal in the United States, and they seemed to be high-minded and deep. They were all ultimately interpreted by the audience as entertainment. And the depth and nuance gets lost in the media form itself. It flattens everything out. Now, that's not to say, and he would be the first to say, Neil Postman would be the first to say, that doesn't mean that everything is equal. It doesn't mean that watching, Dancing with the Stars is equal in terms of brain work to watching congressional hearings on television, but watching congressional hearings on television is nowhere near the level of engagement as reading an account of it or being in the room with it or reading the documents about it, right? So that the flattening is an important dynamic. So Facebook does all of that to a greater extreme. Like television, Facebook is a meta medium. It contains all other previous media forms. It contains text, it contains audio, it contains video, it contains photography, and it presents it in the shallowest possible fashion as a flow of stimulation where you have to actively click on something to get to whatever depth is being offered. In addition, the flow itself and the framing on Facebook makes everything kind of look the same, whether it's an advertisement or a news story or gossip or a conspiracy theory item. They all are presented in the same box-like fashion, in the same blue and white framing. It's very hard. It takes action and work by the audience to distinguish among these in any reasonable way. So like television, it flattens everything and creates a meta medium that makes you pay more attention to the medium. And all you remember is, I saw this on Facebook. You don't remember whether you read it in The Economist or you read it in Haaretz or you read it in Le Monde. You saw it on Facebook. So I'm not making the case that Facebook is radical and revolutionary in form and effect as much as in extremity.
Maybe a double-edged question. Are the owners of Facebook aware of the nefarious effect of their platform, and do they even care? Because you describe them in the book as this power-thirsty, profit-driven group of people, which is fair. But is there any way to contain them, both on the government level and also what can we do as individuals, as users of Facebook? I have to admit that I am a user of Facebook, not a very religiously in my use of Facebook, but still, what can we do as individuals, as citizens?
Okay, so that has multiple levels to it. When I look at the people who run Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg specifically, but also his chief lieutenants, I see a very cloistered group. I see people almost exclusively men. There's only one woman in that top level crew. Almost exclusively white men, almost exclusively from elite schools, elite universities and schools. And they are all living in Northern California at a particular moment in time. So they don't represent the world, and they see the world through their own experiences. So they make design decisions and business decisions to reflect what they feel are the best values given their perspective, right? So a very narrow group of people. And when they do this, though, they truly believe that what they do is good for the world. So I don't think they're motivated by profit. I think there's plenty of reason to think that they're not, including their own statements, which I have to take as sincere. What they're motivated by is an almost evangelical zealotry, a belief that connecting humans, a belief that open and sincere communication among people who can't hide their identity and can't be anonymous is ultimately beneficial to our species. They truly believe that the more we connect each other, the more we get to know each other, the more we get to see each other, the more we get to see how each other live and think and breathe and work and have sex differently. We will learn to understand and appreciate each other better. A very naive idea that tends to ignore the vast majority of human history, right? If neighbors got along better because they saw each other every day, then, for instance, Jerusalem would be a very different city, right? We know for a fact that proximity connection is not the answer to peace and love or understanding. This seems to have evaded the people who run Facebook. They seem to think that connecting people generates goodwill almost automatically, and that connecting them through this virtual platform, commercially driven, advertisement driven and funded, is somehow a good way to achieve that, as opposed to, say, convening people in a civic organization, right? So it seems incredibly naive. It seems uneducated, and it seems zealotrous. It seems evangelical, and that's their big motivation. So everything they do is designed to get more people on Facebook, to get us to use Facebook as many minutes of the day as possible, to spread the word of Facebook, to urge us to use Facebook for more and more activities in our day, and ultimately to be the most important medium, not just of communication or media, but in all sorts of things. The ultimate goal is to be the operating system of our lives. Now, Google also wants to be the operating system of our lives. Amazon does, Microsoft does. There are many competitors for this goal. All of these companies want to harvest our data, harvest our activities, track us to the maximum, and then leverage that surveillance toward managing all the data in our lives, whether it means our refrigerators can tell that company, hey, we're out of milk, and to order a particular kind of milk, or it means that they will know the temperature of our houses, or it means they will know what we're thinking and what we might want to read next, right? So that's the ultimate goal. This sort of idea that through these sorts of systems, our lives can all be better, and the money flows from that. They will get rewarded on the back end, and so far they have been, right? There's nothing to say they haven't been. Can we do anything about that? Well, look, it's really hard to opt out of Facebook. And I actually think that as individuals, if we think opting out of Facebook makes a difference, we only do so out of either a failure to recognize that there are 2.7 billion other Facebook users who have no interest in resigning from Facebook, and each of us doesn't matter at all, right? Perhaps it takes a certain amount of arrogance to think that quitting Facebook is something Facebook would ever care about. So I don't think that's a viable response. We could use antitrust law in America or competition law in Europe to try to sever parts of Facebook and make the company smaller and create competition. I don't think competition is necessarily the answer to anything. I don't think having 2 or 3 or 5 major social media companies that all do the same thing improves the world. I don't think that competition would necessarily make us all gravitate toward a better environment. So I'm naive. I'm cynical about that. I would say that one thing we can do is have countries across the world pass laws that give us as individuals, as citizens, power over the data that we create when we interact with these companies, giving us much more autonomy, where companies have to explicitly request our permission to use our data to build systems and to target things. That would be a vast improvement. I think it would go a long way if we were to, for instance, put restrictions on how our personal data can be used to target advertising, and force advertising back to where it was in the 20th century as part of a mass medium, an effort to reach the largest number of people, not the smallest number of people. This is inefficient, of course, but efficiency can't be the only value in the world. So I think there are some areas of legislation, regulation we could think about in a variety of countries. I'm not optimistic that we're having that kind of discussion at the level that we should.
One more question that it's been on my mind as you're talking is that you really portray Facebook as having or seeking a real sort of almost controlling influence over the users through all these mechanisms you're talking about. And I wonder if that doesn't diminish a little bit the responsibility and the agency of the users themselves. I mean,
right.
whether or not we trust people to be responsible is one thing,
Yeah.
but people do have agency one way or the other. They can choose, as you pointed out, to get on or off Facebook,
Right.
but they could also choose to use Facebook in certain ways, to have more deliberate conversations if they want to.
Yes.
And I think the flip side of that question, I'm getting to a question. I think the flip side of that question is the people who use it for extreme discussions and for extreme behavior and spreading QAnon. Are those the kind of people who might very well be conspiracists and extremists anyway on some other platform?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, how do you see the role of people?
So here's the thing: going backwards on those, like working our way backwards on those questions. Yes, those extremists, if they're kicked off of Facebook, as they often are, and then they get right back on, would certainly find each other using another platform, and they often use multiple platforms. They don't only use Facebook. But Facebook is the place to recruit. Facebook is the place to find your uncle who is disaffected by some issue and then gets drawn into some conspiracy theory. Right? Facebook is the place to find new members. And there's nothing better than Facebook for that, right? We've never had anything better than that for recruiting. YouTube is, again, pretty close. And if you want to recruit young men to hate women, YouTube is the best possible thing. That's where all the real hardcore misogyny happens. Now, remember, Facebook and YouTube are connected in an important way. YouTube videos flow on Facebook very well. They get posted to Facebook and shared on Facebook very well as well. So these aren't necessarily distinct systems in our media ecosystem. So what about personal responsibility? What about the people? Well, let's remember that all technological systems are merely extensions of ourselves. So to ask, is it the people or is it the technology, is to pretend that they are distinct from each other. Facebook is us and we are Facebook. Facebook is Facebook because we are really nasty animals. We do horrible things to each other, and we always have. We're pretty special among animals in the sense that we can actually check ourselves and ask ourselves, is this the way we want to behave? But look, we brutalize each other. We hurt each other even if we're in the same families, right? We are not good animals. We are not nice animals. We are in the Christian sense, fallen and sinful. We are destined in other ways to have the temptations to be shallow, mean, and even violent. Given that, we've created institutions, right? We know that about ourselves. We've known this for centuries. We've written books. We've written philosophies. We've written sermons. We've built churches and temples and synagogues and mosques to try to train us out of those inclinations to be mean to each other, to harm each other. It's taken millions of years to create social accords and social relations that can insulate us to the best of our ability. It takes hard work, right? And we know this. So these institutions that foster mutual understanding and decency, et cetera, they have to be maintained. That has to be our priority. Facebook doesn't work that way. Facebook is a place where all of humanity, it seems, or at least a third of humanity, interacts with some regularity. And we interact with people we don't necessarily like or don't necessarily want to like. And so we're mean to each other. Now, if Facebook were for golden retrievers, it would be great. Golden retrievers don't hurt anybody. They love everybody. So, I tend to think that Facebook was written with a certain comfort and naivete for the nature of the human experience. There seemed to be no recognition of the level of cruelty to which human beings are capable. And again, if Facebook were all full of people who were nice to each other, there would be nothing but beauty there, right? We would all be pictures of babies and puppies. Unfortunately, that's not where we are.
All right. Siva Vaidyanathan, Professor of Media Studies at the University of Virginia and the author of the 2018 book, Antisocial Media, How Facebook Disconnects Us and Undermines Democracy. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Shalom.
And many thanks to Itai Shalom, manager of TLV1 Studios, and Ariel Cohen, our producer. And once again to the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their partnership and support for this series. And now we have got a request because many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcast app and would like to ask you to please write a review of any kind. You can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Please check out our archive. It has more than 600 interviews. And if you like us here, you can also like us on Facebook and follow me and Dalia, as well as the podcast, on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from Dalia and from me, goodbye.